So what is me? What is this thing that I feel I have and you feel you have, an observing external self? What I'm reading lately, I mean, I've been reading kind of the same material for the last 3 years, because when I become obsessed with something, I become obsessed with it. So if you listen to interviews from anagnosis, you'll probably hear some of the same books. That's not because I'm slow, it's because I reread it. There's one thing that interests me, and then I talk about it in my show. It's the search for one's soul. But the word soul it's a lot. What does it mean? You know, is it my subconscious, which is me as an unbeliever in the divine? I believe there is an infinite in us. I believe there's a body, but that's not me. If you cut off my arm, me will still exist. There is my thoughts, but that's changing all the time, so that's not me. There is my feelings, but that's changing. I can be sad now, I can be happy in 2 minutes, so that's obviously not me either. So what is me? What is this thing that I feel I have and you feel you have, an observing external self? The idea of self, how does this form? The idea of a conscious self, which I think is maybe what I would call a soul, that interests me. It interests me biologically, evolutionary. How did we reach a point where we are maybe the only animals that have it to that degree? Even though I love animals and they all have conscious intelligence, this identity of self and ability to suffer because of it, and imagination, is something that apparently we have at least a higher degree than all animals. So how did it come biologically? Then it's interesting to me psychologically, to myself. Who am I because of this? What am I? Then it's interesting to me anthropologically, as a species of humans, as societies, how we interact with that self, how we are suppressing it and creating imaginary gods, fathers and mothers in the sky and in the earth, to see us, to hold us, to witness us, to care about us in an uncaring universe. And I think that's the main thing that interests me. So I read a lot of Jung. I became obsessed with the Red Book, but now I'm onto the Black Books, which is the entire series of books that have been edited to become the Red Book in the end. I read a lot of Joseph Campbell, which is a comparative religion writer, very famous. So he takes religions or beliefs from anthropological, archaeological studies around the world and compares and finds coherent threads between them. What are the archetypes, just like Jung has in psychology, what are the archetypes of story, of narrative that keep on repeating? Maybe it tells us something about our human needs. And that's interesting to me. So that's what I'm obsessed with. I don't know how it comes to then be translated into what I write, because I also read a lot of poetry, because what I do is, at least I aim for poetry, even though I don't consider myself a poet. I'm a songwriter. But I read a lot of Hebrew poets, such as Yehuda Amichai or Natan Alterman. And then how do you take all that huge subject about what is me, which is what is everybody, and how do you create something concise? And how do you make it specific enough that it talks about the subject you want to talk about, but wide enough that it doesn't really talk about me? It talks about whoever needs it to talk about them when they read it or listen to it. And how do you make it metaphorical enough and beautiful enough? So that's what interests me lately. And that's what I'm reading. Does this make any sense? Or is it just in my head make sense?